smelled like antiseptic and cold steel. Pale blue walls. A single window with the blinds half drawn. The kind of hospital room you only ever end up in when someone has already decided your life is worth less than something else they wanted. She was sitting up in the bed. Her left side was wrapped in layers of white gauze. One of her hands was pressed flat against the sheet, right over the place where a part of her body had been that morning and was no longer. Her eyes were open. Her eyes were dry. She was not crying. In front of her, on the clean white bedsheet, there was a manila folder. Annulment papers. A gold pen laid across the top of the folder the way a waiter lays down cutlery at the beginning of a meal. The door had just closed. The man who had placed the folder on her bed had just walked out. 17 minutes before this, she had given him her kidney. 7 minutes before this, he had walked into the room, looked at her bandaged body, and said the 3 words she would carry for the rest of her life. She had not signed the papers. She was not going to sign the papers. And somewhere across the city, on the 42nd floor of a glass building in Gangnam, a man she had never officially met was setting down a cup of tea, turning to the only person in the room with him and saying very quietly, "It's time." His hand rested on the desk, unnaturally still. A thin pale scar along the left side of his jawline caught the last of the evening light. A plain steel band sat on the smallest finger of his left hand. The other man in the room did not speak. He simply nodded once and left to make the phone calls that were about to rearrange the lives of everyone the story was about to touch. She did not know him yet. She had met him once. 5 years ago, on a rainy night in London, at a noodle stand, at 1 in the morning, when she was 28 years old and still believed the world was on her side. She did not remember his face. He had never forgotten hers. Her name was EYESORE. She was Ghanaian. She was 33 years old. She was the best cook in any room she had ever walked into, and for 11 years she had been saving, stitching, sacrificing, and quietly preparing to open a restaurant in Seoul called Nsarama, which in Twi means child of the stars, and which was going to carry her mother's name above the door. His name was Seo Jun-ho. He was 38 years old. He ran a network in Seoul that the news did not know how to write about, because the news did not know it existed. He had built it brick by brick, after something happened to him at 16 that he had never spoken about out loud, and he lived by one rule. He protected the people the world had decided did not matter. And 5 years ago, on a rainy night in London, a woman he did not know had slid half of her meal across a noodle counter to a stranger who was quietly bleeding, and had said, without looking at him, "Eat. Whatever it is, it's not going to be solved on an empty stomach." He had never, for a single day since, stopped paying that debt. The door of the hospital room stayed closed. Efua did not move. The heart monitor beside her kept its slow, steady count. And for 30 long seconds, she simply looked at that door. Not at the folder. Not at the pen. At the door. Something inside her did not break. It rearranged. Then, very slowly, she picked up her phone. She did not call the man who had just walked out. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call the police. She called her auntie. The line clicked. A voice in Accra accented Korean, warm and unhurried, said, "Efua, sweetheart, are you out of surgery?" Efua's voice cracked for the first and only time in the entire story she was about to live. She said, "Auntie, I need somewhere to go. Before we go any further, you need to understand who this woman was before the folder landed on her bed. Because what this man was about to do to her would not have been survivable by most people. And what she was about to do back to him would not have been imaginable, if you did not know, from the beginning, exactly who she had been all along. So we are going to go back. 6 months earlier. A small apartment in Mapo. 1 bedroom. A kitchen barely wider than Efua's shoulders. It was 6 in the morning and the city outside was still gray and blue and half asleep. Inside the kitchen, a single warm yellow light was on above the stove. The smell of fresh ginger and garlic and something deeper, something with the rich, slow warmth of palm oil and smoked fish, was filling the room. Efua was at the counter. Her hair was pulled back into a high natural afro puff. She was barefoot. She was humming, low and soft, a Ghanaian hymn her grandmother used to sing in the kitchen back home in Kumasi, when the light was still thin and the children were still asleep. Her hands moved the way a pianist's hands move when they have stopped having to look at the keys. She did not have to look at what she was doing. She had been doing it since she was 8 years old. On the counter beside her, there was a worn leather notebook, open to a page so covered in her own handwriting that the original printed lines underneath had long since disappeared. At the top of the page, in her careful looping script, were 2 words. Sarama. Draft 41. Draft 41 of an opening menu for a restaurant she had been building in her head since she was 22 years old. In the next room, a man was pulling on a charcoal suit jacket in front of a mirror. He was adjusting his cuffs. He was checking his watch. His name was Lee Min-suk. He had been married to Efua for 2 years and 4 months. And he had not once, in those 2 years and 4 months, walked into her kitchen at 6 in the morning and asked her what she was cooking. He walked past the kitchen now without looking in. He said, over his shoulder, in that clipped practical tone he used when he was already thinking about his calendar. Mother's doctors called last night. The results are back. Efua put down her wooden spoon. She turned. She said, and, he said, not good. They are going to need to have the donor conversation soon. I will handle it, she said. Min-suk, if there is anything I can do. He said, still not looking at her. There might be. We will talk about it later. He adjusted his cuffs one more time. Then he said, almost as an afterthought, also, my mother's friends are coming tonight. Please do not cook anything too heavy. You know how they are about the smell. He did not wait for an answer. He walked out. Efua stood in the kitchen for a long moment, holding the wooden spoon, looking at the door he had just closed. Her jaw set very quietly for half a second. Then it released. She turned back to the stove. She lifted the lid of the pot. The smell rose and filled the room again, warm and dark and full of home. She looked down into the pot. She said under her breath in Chui to no one, you are not too heavy. You are exactly the right weight. And she kept cooking. This was the shape of her life. She was a sous chef at one of the most respected fine dining kitchens in Seoul, a restaurant called Baekrok, where she was the only black woman in a line of 13 cooks and where the head chef, a quiet man in his 60s named Chef Beck, had taken her on 3 years earlier for reasons he had never fully explained to her. Every morning she left the apartment at 7. Every night she came home at midnight. In the hours between, she stood on her feet and she cooked food that cost more per plate than she had grown up eating in a month. And the Korean men on either side of her called her Chef Sarpong with a particular mix of respect and wariness, because she was very good, and because she did not smile easily at men who had not earned it. Her husband was the second son of a mid-tier conglomerate family. He had been handsome to her once, in the way careful, composed men can be handsome before you understand that the composure is not calm, it is control. He had married her because she was beautiful in a way his friends would not immediately understand, and because beneath the wariness he thought she was soft enough to shape. He had been wrong about the second part. He had not yet understood that he was wrong. Her mother had been dead for 10 years. Cancer. Misdiagnosed for 2 years at a clinic in Accra that kept losing her file. Her mother's last fully lucid sentence to her, whispered through cracked lips in a hospital bed on a Tuesday afternoon, had been this. Don't let anyone ever tell you you take up too much room, my girl. The world was made big enough for you. Efua had buried her mother on a Tuesday. For months later, she had got on a plane to London with her grandmother's chili oil recipe folded inside her passport. She had been reaching quietly every day since, for the size of life her mother had promised her. And then, 2 weeks before the hospital room, before the folder, before the 3 words, there had been a small noodle bar in an alley off Yuljiro, 2 blocks from her restaurant. It had been a Thursday. She had come off a double shift. Her back was hurting. Her phone had not stopped buzzing for an hour. She had looked up on the walk home, seen the yellow light spilling out of a doorway she had walked past 100 times, and for reasons she could not have explained to anyone, she had turned and gone inside. The bar had 8 stools. 3 of them were occupied. She took the one at the end. 3 stools down from her, a man was already seated. Dark overcoat, dark roll neck. His head was slightly bent over a bowl of noodles. He did not look up when she came in. She ordered. Her phone buzzed again. Lee Min-suk, where are you? Dinner. She looked at the phone for a long moment. She did not reply. She turned it face down on the counter. The owner set a small bowl in front of her. Hot broth, thin noodles, a single soft egg. She picked up her chopsticks. The man 3 stools down, without looking at her, without speaking, reached one hand out and slid a small dish of kimchi along the counter toward her until it was within her reach. Just enough. He did not push it any further. He did not look at her face. He simply placed it close enough that she could reach it without stretching. And then he went back to his own bowl. Efua looked at the kimchi for a long moment. Then she looked at him. He still had not raised his head. She said, very quietly, in Korean, "Thank you." He nodded. Once. He did not speak. Neither of them said another word to each other. After a while he finished his bowl, placed his chopsticks neatly across the rim, stood up and walked out into the rain. He did not look at her on his way past. She finished her meal. She reached for her wallet. The owner of the bar, an older woman with flour still on her fingernails, shook her head. The owner said, "The gentleman took care of it." Efua said, surprised, "What gentleman?" The owner said, with the faintest private smile of a woman who knew something she was not going to say. "The one who was here. He comes sometimes. He pays for whoever is at the counter that night. He says it is a rule he has." Efua sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, slowly, "Does he have a name?" The owner said, "He has never given me one." Efua walked home through the rain that night with her hands deep in the pockets of her coat and her mother's sentence running, unexpectedly, through her head for the first time in months. The world was made big enough for you. She did not know, as she walked past the dark shop fronts and the wet neon and the low hum of a city going to sleep around her, that the man who had slid the kimchi across the counter had been waiting, 5 years, for the chance to do even that much for her. She did not know that he had been sitting in that bar, on and off, for half a year, just in case she ever wandered in. She did not know that when she had turned her phone face down on the counter, he had almost looked up. She did not remember his face. He was the only face, in fact, that she was ever going to remember for the rest of her life. She just did not know it yet. Across the city, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, a man was sitting at a desk in a room that was quieter than most rooms in Seoul. The walls were dark wood. The desk was dark wood. The chair was black leather. There was no art on the walls. There were no photographs on the desk. There was one single object on that desk that did not belong to the furniture, and it was a framed photograph, face down, that only he ever turned over. He turned it over now. In the photograph, taken from a long distance through the window of a restaurant, a Ghanaian woman in chef whites was plating a dish. Her tongue was caught between her teeth in concentration. Her hands, scarred across the knuckles, were doing something small and precise with a sprig of herb. She did not know the photograph existed. The photograph had been taken, without her knowledge, by a man she had never met, who had been instructed to take exactly one photograph and destroy his camera afterward. The man at the desk looked at the photograph for a long moment. His face did not move. His hand, on the desk, was unnaturally still. Behind him, the door opened. A broad-shouldered man in a dark blazer walked in with a slim leather notebook tucked under one arm. His name was Park Tae-hoon. He had worked for the man at the desk for 15 years. He was the only person in Seoul who was allowed to walk into that room without knocking. Tae-hoon stopped in front of the desk. He said carefully, "Boss, the husband. There's movement." The man at the desk did not look up from the photograph. He said, "I know." Tae-hoon said, "The hospital date is confirmed. The donor is confirmed." She signed the papers this morning. The hand on the desk, which had been unnaturally still, closed very slowly into a fist. Held. Released. The man at the desk said, quietly, "Make sure the best nephrologist in Seoul is on that surgical team. Anonymously. I want her to wake up." Tae-hoon said, "Understood." The man at the desk said, "And Tae-hoon, the husband, I want eyes on him. Every room he walks into. Every phone call he makes. I want to know what he does when she is under." Tae-hoon nodded. Started toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. He had been working for this man for 15 years. In 15 years, he had never once seen him turn over the photograph on his own desk in front of another human being. He had seen it earlier through the crack of the door. He knew what he had seen. He said, with the carefulness of a man who has earned the right to ask one question a year, "Boss, are we preparing for something?" The man at the desk finally looked up. His eyes were very calm. He said, "We are preparing for the fact that he is not going to be who she thinks he is when she wakes up. And when that happens, I need to be ready to act within the hour." Tae-hoon nodded once. He walked out. He closed the door behind him. And in the silence of that room, the man at the desk turned the photograph face down again, very gently, the way a man folds a letter he has read 1,000 times. His name was Seo Jun-ho. He had been loving her, quietly, from exactly this distance, for 5 years. And the viewer now knew something Efua did not know, and it was the kind of knowing that would sit under every scene of the story like a second heartbeat until the moment she finally turned around and saw him standing there. This is the part of the story where I want you to do me a favor. Take 1 second. Think of a man you have known in your life. A man who was very good at smiling at the right time in the right room for the right people. A man whose politeness was the most frightening thing about him. A man whose smile always arrived a half second after he had finished calculating whether it should. If you have known a man like that, put a word in the comments. Just one. The word that comes up for you first when you think of him. I want to see how many of us have met the same man, wearing a different face. Because you are about to meet him now. Friday night. A private dining room on the top floor of a hotel in Cheongdamdong. Low amber lighting. A long table set for 14. Crystal. Silk. The faint, clean scent of expensive orchids. Lee Min-suk stood at the head of the table in a midnight blue suit, pouring wine for his mother's oldest friend. He smiled at her. The smile arrived exactly 1 second after he had decided it should. She did not notice. To his right, his mother was seated in a wheelchair, pale and thin, with the specific tiredness of a woman whose body had been failing quietly for 18 months. To his left, a woman in a cream silk dress was laughing softly at something an older man across the table had just said. Her name was Han Mi-sundae. Her smile arrived a visible half-second too late. Her eyes were slightly tight at the corners. She was touching the pearl at her throat. Min-suk set down the wine bottle. He placed one hand, lightly, on the back of Mi-sun's chair. He did not touch her. He simply placed his hand on the chair. She felt the hand behind her and her spine straightened very slightly, in the exact way a well-trained child straightens when a parent enters the room. Efua was not there. Efua was at home, in the small kitchen in Mapo, alone. She had been told that morning that dinner tonight was a family matter. She had been told that morning that her presence would be unnecessary. She had nodded. She had gone to the market. She had cooked, anyway, a small pot of groundnut soup, because she had told herself she was simply cooking for the next day's lunch. She had eaten a bowl of it alone, standing up at 6 in the evening, while her husband was upstairs in a hotel pouring wine for another woman. Min-suk raised his glass at the dinner. He made a quiet toast to his mother's strength. He thanked the friends of the family for their prayers. He said, in a voice low enough that the servers in the corner of the room leaned slightly forward to hear, that the family had found a donor match, that the procedure would be within the month, that they could all begin at last to look forward. His mother reached up from her wheelchair and squeezed his hand. She said, in a voice that had once been sharper, softer now with illness, "You have always been such a good son." He smiled at her. The smile arrived 1 second after he had decided it should. He said, "Mother, you taught me well." And in the kitchen in Mapo, Efua Sarpong finished her soup, washed her bowl, dried her hands, and reached for the leather notebook on the counter. She opened it. She turned to a fresh page. And she began, in her careful looping script, to write out draft 42 of an opening menu for a restaurant that she was going to open one day, no matter what it cost her, in her mother's name. 3 weeks later, she went under. The surgery took 4 hours. A nephrologist from a hospital in Busan who had been flown in that morning at a cost no one explained to her performed the extraction. A second team, waiting in an adjoining theater, transplanted the kidney into her mother-in-law within the hour. Both operations were, by every clinical measure, successful. Efua swam up through the anesthesia slowly. The light above her bed was too bright. Her mouth was dry. Her left side felt like someone had reached inside her with a hand made of lead and closed it, slowly, around her ribs. The nurse at her bedside was Korean, young, kind. She held a cup of water to Efua's mouth. Efua drank. The nurse said, in Korean, "Your mother-in-law is stable. She is going to live. You saved her life, ma'am." Efua closed her eyes. She said, in a voice thick with drugs and relief, "Thank God." The nurse left. The room was quiet. The heart monitor kept its slow count. Efua drifted. She did not know what time it was when she heard the door open. She did not open her eyes at first. She assumed it was the nurse again. She assumed it would be a doctor, a chart, a check of her vitals. She assumed, without thinking about it, that her husband had been there at some point, and that she had missed him because she had been under. She opened her eyes. Lee Min-suk was standing at the foot of her bed. He was wearing the same midnight blue suit he had been wearing at his mother's dinner 3 weeks earlier. He was holding a manila folder in one hand. He was looking at her. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a piece of furniture that no longer matches the room. She tried to smile. Her mouth was still too dry for it to work properly. She said, "Min-suk, your mother." He said, "She is stable." She said, "Thank God." He said, "Yes." There was a pause. He did not move closer to the bed. He did not touch her. He did not take her hand. He did not ask how she was feeling. She said, slowly, because something in the air of the room was wrong and she could not yet name it, "Min-suk, what is the folder?" He walked forward. He placed the folder on the edge of the bed. He placed a gold pen across the top of the folder, the way a waiter lays down cutlery at the beginning of a meal. He said, without any particular emotion, "Annulment papers. The family attorney drew them up this morning. You will need to sign them before you are discharged. There is a settlement attached that is generous. More than generous. You will be able to return to Accra comfortably." She did not understand at first. She said, "I am sorry." "What?" He said, "You gave me what I needed. My mother is alive. The inheritance clause has cleared. Me son is at the tailor's this afternoon for the engagement dress. My family cannot have a public mess. You are going to sign these papers, take the settlement, and go home. Quietly. We both understand how this works." She stared at him. She said, "Min-suk, I just gave you my kidney 17 minutes ago." He looked at her. He looked at the bandaged side. He looked at her swollen face. He looked at her hair, matted flat against the pillow from 6 hours under the surgical lights. He said very clearly, very flatly, almost gently. He said, "You're an eyesore." He did not say it cruelly. He did not say it with heat. He said it the way his mother had said it to him every day of his childhood. He said it as if he were doing her a kindness by being honest. He said it as if it were an observation about the weather, inevitable, uninteresting, already decided. He said, "Sign the papers. Go home." He turned. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. He did not turn back. He said, "For what it is worth. Thank you. For the kidney." He opened the door. He walked through. The door closed behind him. The room was very quiet. The heart monitor kept its slow count. The pale blue walls did not move. The blinds at the window were still half drawn. Somewhere, 2 floors down, a cart was being rolled along a polished corridor, and a woman was laughing softly on a phone. Efua did not cry. She did not move. She lay very still in the bed, with her left side wrapped in white gauze, and her eyes did not leave the closed door for a very long time. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever been in a room alone after a person has said something to you that you are going to carry for the rest of your life, I want you to put one word in the comments. The word that came up in your chest when the door closed. Not the word you said out loud afterward. The word that came up in your chest first. Because I want you to know you are not the only person in this comment section who knows that word. Take the breath with her, and then watch what this woman does next. Because this is the moment the story turned. Very slowly, her right hand moved. It did not move toward the folder. It did not move toward the pen. It moved, with the slow, careful effort of a body that had just lost an organ, toward the bedside table, toward her phone. Her fingers closed around it. She lifted it to her chest. She looked at the screen for a long moment, and then she unlocked it and she dialed one number. Not her husband. Not a lawyer. Not the police. She dialed her auntie. The line rang twice. A voice in Accra accented Korean, warm and unhurried, said, "Efua, sweetheart, are you out of surgery?" Efua opened her mouth. The word home tried to come up and could not. She tried again. Her voice cracked. For the first and only time in this entire story, she said, "Auntie, I need somewhere to go." There was 1 full second of silence on the other end of the line. Then Auntie Akojua's voice came back, and it was no longer warm and unhurried. It was steady and quiet, and as clear as a knife. She said, "Tell me what room." "I am coming now." Efua told her the hospital. Efua told her the floor. Efua told her the room number. Efua hung up the phone. She laid it against her chest, over her heart, and she stared at the closed door of that hospital room, and she waited. She did not sign the papers. She did not touch the pen. 40 minutes later, Auntie Akojua Boateng walked into that hospital room with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a silver-threaded afro cropped close to her skull and a gold Guy Niam pendant at her throat. And she looked at her niece on the bed, and she looked at the folder on the sheet, and she looked at the pen and she picked up the pen and she put it in her own pocket. She said, "Get dressed. We are going home." "My home," Efua said. "Auntie, I cannot stand." Akojua said, "Then I will carry you." And she did. Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, a phone was ringing in a very quiet room. Seo Jun-ho picked it up on the first ring. He listened for exactly 11 seconds. He did not speak. Then he said quietly, "Repeat what he said to her." The voice on the other end repeated it. There were 3 words. The 3 words the title of this story is built on. Yun-ho listened. His face did not move. His hand, on the desk, was unnaturally still. He said, "Is she alone right now?" The voice said, "Her aunt is on the way." He said, "Good." He said, "I do not want anyone from our side in that hospital. Do not approach her. Do not go near her aunt. She is not going to know we are here. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not for a long time." The voice said, "Understood." Junho said, "But I want you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you." He said, Lee Min-suk, his mother's inheritance. Every legal document he has filed in the last 24 hours. Every conversation he has had with his attorney. Every transfer that has gone into or out of his accounts since the date of the donor match. I want all of it. By morning. The voice said, "Boss." Junho said, "And I want one more thing." There was a small pause. He said, "The fiancé, Anmi-san, her family, her position, her prenuptial agreement, her exit options. I want her file on my desk by tomorrow night." The voice said, "Understood." Junho hung up the phone. He sat very still in his chair. He looked, for a long moment, at the framed photograph face down on the corner of his desk. He did not turn it over this time. He said, out loud to no one, in a voice so quiet that even the man standing at the door did not catch the words. He said, "I'm sorry, Efua. I should have moved sooner." Tae-hoon, at the door, pretended he had not heard. Akojua's apartment was above a herbal medicine shop on a narrow street in Itaewon. It was small. It was warm. It was full of things no other apartment in Seoul smelled like. Dried ginger, star anise, the faint earthy memory of shea butter, a small framed photograph of Efua's mother on a low shelf by the window, next to a candle that had been lit every Sunday for 10 years. Akojua laid Efua on the couch in the living room. She placed a cushion under her bandaged side. She covered her with a blanket so soft and old that Efua recognized it from her aunt's old bedroom in Accra, 25 years ago. She set a small bowl of warm groundnut soup on the low table beside the couch. She did not tell Efua to eat. She simply placed it where she could reach it. She sat in the armchair across from her niece. She did not ask what had happened. She simply sat, and she waited. Efua looked at the ceiling for a very long time. Then she looked at her aunt, and she told her everything. The folder, the pen, the sentence, the tailor's shop, the mother's dinner 3 weeks earlier, the soup she had eaten alone at 6 in the evening, the kidney, the 17 minutes. Akojua listened without interrupting once. Her face did not move, but somewhere around the middle of the story, her eyes went very black, and her mouth went very flat, and her body went very still, and anyone who knew Akojua Boateng would have known that the woman in the armchair was no longer sitting in grief. She was sitting in something older, something colder, something that the Ghanaian aunties in her family had been carrying for 3 generations and had never once wasted on a man who did not deserve it. When Efua finished talking, Akojua did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You did not sign." Efua said, "No." Akojua said, "Good girl." She stood up. She crossed the room. She knelt, slowly, beside the couch. She took one of Efua's scarred hands in both of hers. Her hands were dry and warm and smelled faintly of ginger. She said, "Listen to me, my love. You are going to sleep in this apartment tonight. You are going to heal in this apartment for as many weeks as you need to. And when you can stand up again, we are going to do 2 things in this exact order. Do you hear me?" Efua nodded. Akojua said, "First, We are going to open that restaurant. The one with your mother's name above the door. We are going to open it here in Seoul, in the middle of the street where he can see it every time he drives to work, and it is going to be the best restaurant in this city within 1 year. Do you understand me? Efua nodded. Akojua said, Second. That man. Lee Min-suk. He is not going to keep his mother's money. He is not going to keep his fiancée. He is not going to keep his name. Not because we are going to take it from him. Because he is going to hand it to us. With his own hands. Do you understand me? Efua did not nod this time. She said very quietly, Auntie, how? Akojua looked at her niece for a long, long moment. Then Akojua said, in a voice so steady that Efua's chest hurt, I do not know yet, my love, but I have lived long enough to know one thing. Men like him always hand it to you themselves. You just have to live long enough to be in the room when they drop it. Efua closed her eyes. A single tear slid down the side of her face, into her hair. She did not wipe it away. She said, Auntie, Adwoa. Akojua said, I will call her tonight. She will be on a plane by morning. Efua whispered, Thank you. Akojua said, Sleep, my love. Nothing else happens tonight. Tonight, you sleep in your aunt's house, and the world can wait. She stood. She walked to the window. She lit the candle by her sister's photograph. She stood at the window for a long moment, looking at the narrow Itaewon Street below, and her eyes were very black, and her mouth was very flat, and the guy Niam pendant at her throat caught the candlelight once and held it. Adwoa Frimpong arrived from Accra at 7 in the morning, 2 days later. On a red-eye flight she had booked within 40 minutes of Akojua's phone call. She had long, thick box braids, a small gold stud in the left nostril, and an overstuffed travel bag that she dropped inside the door of Akojua's apartment without setting down. She walked straight into the living room. She took one look at Efua on the couch. Her sharp, bright face went completely still. Then she crossed the room, sat on the edge of the couch, and very carefully, so as not to hurt her best friend's stitched side, she gathered Efua into her arms. She did not speak. She simply held on. And Efua Sarpong, who had not cried once in the hospital, who had not cried once in her aunt's apartment, who had not cried once at the foot of the bed the night she watched her mother die, finally, put her forehead against her best friend's shoulder and broke. She cried for 40 minutes without stopping. Adwoa did not shush her. Adwoa did not offer a single word of comfort. Adwoa simply held her and rocked her very slightly, the way Adwoa's grandmother used to rock both of them when they were 8 years old and someone had taken something from them at school that they did not yet have the language to name. When Efua finally ran out of tears, Adwoa said, very softly, against her friend's hair, I've got you, sister. I've got you. And this man is going to learn who he married. That afternoon, a plain white envelope slid under the door of Akojua's apartment. Akojua found it when she came back from the market. She set down her groceries. She picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands. There was no name on the outside. There was no return address. She opened it. Inside was a single business card. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed in black. The name of a senior family law attorney in a firm so prestigious that Akojua had heard of it even in Itaewon. No note, just the card. She walked into the living room. She placed the card on the low table in front of Efua. She said, Someone is helping us, my love. We do not know who yet. We will find out who later. For now, I want you to call him. Efua looked at the card for a long time. She said, Auntie, I cannot afford a lawyer from this firm. Akojua said, I do not think he is sending us a bill, my love. Efua picked up the card. She turned it in her scarred fingers. She said slowly, Why would anyone do this? Akojua did not answer. Across the city, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, Seo Junho sat at his desk, did not turn over the photograph, and picked up a pen to sign the retainer that would pay for that attorney's time out of his own personal account, invisibly in perpetuity for as long as Efua Sarpong needed him. She called the number on the card the next morning. The lawyer picked up on the first ring. He said, in careful, unhurried Korean, Mrs. Sarpong, I have been waiting for your call. Please take your time, and tell me everything from the beginning. 3 weeks passed. Efua's stitches came out on a Wednesday. She stood, for the first time, on the Thursday. She walked, slowly, around Akojua's living room on the Friday. By the following Monday, she was walking to the end of the street and back. By the Monday after that, She was going as far as the small park near the herbal shop, sitting on a bench under a ginkgo tree, and watching old Korean men play baduk in the afternoon light. And one evening, for reasons she could not explain to her aunt, she walked further than she had walked in a month. She walked to the small family-run restaurant in an alley in Jongno where Chef Beck's youngest brother ran the kitchen. She had worked shifts there years ago as a favor, before Baykrock had become her life. She stood in the doorway in a simple dark dress and her high afro puff, and she said to the old man behind the counter, "I am not ready to go back to the big kitchen. I am not ready to work for men who knew me as his wife. But I can cook for 10 tables a night. If you will have me." The old man looked at her. He had heard. Everyone in the small restaurant world of Jongno had heard. The Ghanaian chef at Baykrock. The inheritance family. The hospital. The story was already a quiet legend in the back kitchens of 3 districts. He said, "Chef Sarpong, I was hoping you would come." He put her in whites that evening. And on her 4th night cooking in that kitchen, a man walked in alone. He was wearing a dark overcoat, a dark roll neck. He sat at the small counter that looked into the kitchen. He did not pick up the menu. He waited for her to look up. She looked up. She did not recognize him consciously, but something in her chest went still for half a second, the way it had gone still in the noodle bar, and she could not have said why. He said, quietly, in Korean, "What are you cooking tonight?" She said, "Tonight the soup is doenjang jjigae. There is a Ghanaian braise on the side that I made for the staff. It is not on the menu." He said, "I will have the braise." She said, "It is not on the menu." He said, "Then I will have whatever the staff is eating." She looked at him for a moment longer. His face was quiet. His eyes did not move from hers. He did not smile. He did not flirt. He simply waited. She said, "All right." She made him a bowl. She placed it in front of him. He ate it in silence. He paid. He left. He came back the next night, and the next, and the night after that. He never sat anywhere but the counter. He never ordered anything but what she was cooking. He never said more than 1 sentence in a single visit. He tipped once, quietly, at the end of the 1st week, in a folded envelope he left tucked under the empty bowl, and when she opened it in the back kitchen after he had gone, it was an amount of money so absurd that she sat down, hard on a crate of cabbages, and looked at it for a full minute. She did not know his name. She called him, in her own head, without ever saying it out loud, the man in the dark coat. On his 9th visit, she said, as she placed the bowl in front of him, "I am sorry. I do not know what to call you." He looked at her. Very quietly he said, "Jun-ho." She said, "Jun-ho." He said, "Yes." She said, "Chef Sarpong." He said, "I know." Something in the way he said it made her pause. But the bell at the counter rang for another order, and she turned, and by the time she turned back he was eating, and his face was quiet again, and she told herself she had imagined it. On his 11th visit, she was humming. She did not notice she was humming until she placed his bowl in front of him and he was looking at her. He said quietly, "I heard you, earlier. What was the song?" She said, surprised, "A hymn from home. My grandmother used to sing it when she cooked." He said, "What is it called?" She told him. He nodded once. He said, "Thank you." He ate. He paid. He left. 2 nights later, he came back, and before he sat down at the counter, he placed a small object on the wood in front of her. It was a thin cassette, homemade case, the handwritten label, in careful Korean script, read Ghanaian hymns, 1970s recordings. He said, without looking at her, "In case you ever want to hear your grandmother's song at home." He sat down. He ate his soup. He did not look at her face for the rest of the meal. He paid. He left. Efua stood at the counter for a long moment after he had gone, with the cassette in her scarred hand, and she did not cry, and she did not smile, and she did not move, and she did not know, she did not know, she did not know. She put the cassette in her coat pocket. She finished her shift. She walked home through the cold spring night in Jongno, and for the first time in 7 weeks, the hollow place on her left side where the kidney had been did not feel like the loudest thing in her body. Something else did. A week later, in a cool, quiet meeting room in the lawyer's office in Seoul, the attorney laid 3 documents out on the polished table in front of Efua. He said, "Mrs. Sarpong, we are now in a position to proceed against your former husband. Before we do, there is something you need to know. About the financing of your original apprenticeship here in Seoul. Efua said, My apprenticeship was through Chef Beck. He said, Yes. Chef Beck was asked to take you on. She said, Asked by whom? The lawyer laid a single page in front of her. He did not speak. She looked at it for a long moment. The logo at the top of the page was a clean, minimal mark. A foundation. The name was one she had never heard before. She did not understand why he was showing it to her. Then she did. She said very slowly, This is the same foundation that paid for my mother's treatment in Accra. The lawyer said, Yes. She said, The London Scholarship. He said, Yes. She said, The grant that made it possible for me to move to Seoul. He said, Yes. She said, Who runs this foundation? The lawyer looked at her. For a long moment he did not speak. He was an old man. He was a careful man. He had been watching her face the entire time. He said quietly, Mrs. Sarpong, I think you already know. Efua did not speak. She pushed her chair back very slowly. She stood. Her scarred hand stayed flat against the edge of the polished table for a long moment, steadying herself. The lawyer did not stand up. The lawyer did not say another word. He simply watched her. She walked out of the office. She walked down the hallway. She walked out into the afternoon light of Seoul. And she walked, without thinking about it, without stopping, without looking up, the full 45 minutes from the lawyer's office in Gangnam, across the river, through the center of the city, to the narrow alley in Jongno where a small family restaurant was opening its doors for the evening service. She stopped in the doorway. He was there, at the counter, early, alone. He was eating a small dish of banchan she had not prepared. He had not yet ordered anything. He was simply waiting. He did not see her in the doorway at first. She looked at him. For the first time in the entire story, she looked at him the way the audience had been looking at him the whole time. She whispered, so quietly that only she heard it, It's you. He heard it anyway. He looked up. His face did not move, but his eyes did. He stood. Slowly. He set down his chopsticks. He said very quietly, Please sit down, Efua. I can explain everything. Take one breath with her. Because everything you have watched so far you are about to watch again in your head differently. It was night by the time they reached his office on the 42nd floor. He had not driven her. He had walked beside her, 2 steps behind, the entire way, because he had understood, without needing to be told, that she needed to arrive on her own feet. He closed the door of the office behind her. He did not sit down behind his desk. He crossed the room and stood with his back to the window and the lights of Seoul glittering behind him, and he waited for her to speak first. She did not sit. She said quietly, Start at the beginning, and do not leave anything out. He did not leave anything out. He told her about his younger brother, the alley in Busan, the ambulance that would not come after dark, the 16-year-old boy who had carried the body home on his own back, the rule he had built his life around since that night. He told her about London. 5 years ago, a rainy night, 1 in the morning, a knife wound he had taken an hour before and had not yet had stitched because he had not wanted his men to see him weak. He told her about the noodle stand, the bright yellow light, a young woman with scarred hands and a high afro puff who had sat down 3 stools away from him, seen the blood he was hiding under his sleeve before the old owner of the noodle stand had seen it, and said nothing. She had simply, without speaking, without fuss, slid half of her own bowl across the counter to him, kept her eyes on her own food, and said in careful English, Eat. Whatever it is not going to be solved on an empty stomach. He told her he had not asked her name. He told her she had not asked his. He told her he had walked out of that noodle stand at 1:45 in the morning with a half-empty stomach that was somehow the fullest he had felt in 8 years, and that he had gone to one of his men's apartments and had the wound stitched, and that he had sat in that apartment for 2 hours afterward, looking at the ceiling, thinking about a Ghanaian woman in a noodle stand who had fed a stranger without asking why he was bleeding. He told her he had found her, quietly, within a week, through careful, expensive, patient channels. He told her he had found her mother next. He told her he had found the clinic in Accra that had misdiagnosed her mother for 2 years, and that by the time his people had reached it, her mother was in the final weeks, and there had been nothing left to do except make those weeks as dignified as a human body could be made when it was losing. He had paid for the private room, the drugs that were not available in Ghana that year, the nurse who stayed overnight. He told her Efua had never been told who paid for any of it. He told her he had made sure of that, because he had not wanted her to feel owned. He told her the London scholarship. 2 years later, the master chef in Seoul. 3 years after that, the private clinic that had handled her kidney surgery last month. The nephrologist from Busan who had been flown in at 4 in the morning. The senior family attorney whose card had slid under her aunt's door. All of it. 5 years. He told her he had never once set foot in any building she worked in. He told her he had walked past the restaurant where she cooked on the street at night 4 times in 5 years, and each time he had told himself he was going somewhere else. He told her he had only ever sat down in the same room as her twice. Once, in a noodle bar in Yeoljiro 3 months ago, where he had slid a small dish of kimchi along a counter because he had seen from the way she sat down that she had not eaten all day. And once, 11 visits ago, in the small Jongno restaurant where she had just started working, when he had finally decided that he could not, in good conscience, stay away any longer after what her husband had done. When he had finished speaking, the room was very quiet. Efua stood in the center of that office for a long time without moving. Then she said quietly, "Why did you come into my restaurant, face to face, after all those years? If you never wanted me to know," he said, "because when he did what he did to you in that hospital room, I could not stay in this office any longer and be a man I respected. I decided that even if you never knew who I was, I needed to be in the same room with you, just to see you eat, just to know you were still here." She said, "Jun-ho." He did not move. She said it again. "Yun-ho." It was the first time she had said his name knowing who he was. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, she was walking toward him. She stopped in front of him. She did not speak. He did not move. Then, very slowly, for the first time in 11 years of her adult life, Efua Sarpong reached first. Her scarred hand closed around his still hand on the edge of the desk. He did not breathe for a full second. Then, very slowly, he turned his hand under hers and closed his fingers around hers. And he said one sentence, quiet, almost apologetic. He said, "I have loved you for 5 years. I did not know how to do it any other way." She did not answer with words. She lifted his hand, very gently, and she pressed it against the left side of her body, against the place where the kidney used to be, against the scar that was still new and pink and would be there forever. She said, "Then stand in the room with me now, for the next part. If you have ever, once in your life, had somebody look at you the way this man is looking at her right now, you know that this is the scene in a story where something shifts that you can never quite explain to anyone who was not inside your own body at the time. It does not look like much from the outside. A hand on a desk. A hand on a scar. 2 people standing very close together in a quiet room. From the inside, it is the loudest sound a body has ever made. If a moment in your own life just flashed behind your eyes while you were watching this, you know the person I want you to send this video to. No message is necessary. Just the video. The right person will understand." 2 days later, the counterplay began. The lawyer filed. The first quiet signals went out through the correct legal channels in Seoul. By the end of the week, Lee Min-suk had been informed that his wife, whom he had assumed was halfway back to Accra, was not only still in the country but had retained a legal team that no one in his family circle could explain. He was rattled. For the first time in the video, the polished surface cracked. He adjusted his cuffs too often. He straightened his tie at the breakfast table 3 times before he managed to leave the apartment. He looked at Mi-sun across the breakfast table one morning, and for the first time in the months she had known him, his smile did not arrive at all. He did what frightened powerful men do when their arithmetic stops adding up. He reached sideways. There was a man, an old family friend, a senior prosecutor in the Seoul Central District, a man whose son had been at university with Min-suk, a man who, for the right social favors, would take a quiet call and agree to quietly review a quietly submitted file. The file Min-suk quietly submitted was about Seo Jun-ho. The file was not true. The file did not need to be true. The file simply needed to contain enough of the shape of truth to create a 6-month investigation that would take a specific man out of play at a specific moment. Tae-hoon brought the news to Jun-ho on a Tuesday afternoon in the office. Jun-ho's hand went very still on the desk. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Bring her here." When Efua arrived, he did not bring her into the office. He met her in the reception area on the 42nd floor, at the very end of the working day, and he led her to a smaller room. Warm wood, low lighting, 2 chairs, a single table, no desk between them, he told her. All of it. The charges. The prosecutor. The timeline. The realistic outcome. The fact that any public movement on her case from this point forward would be weaponized against him. And then he told her what the exit looked like. He said quietly, "You sign the annulment. You take the settlement your lawyer has negotiated. It is more than enough to open Sarama in Accra, in your mother's name, exactly the way you always wanted. You go home. You live a long and beautiful life. And I absorb the hit here, alone. They will not be able to touch you once you are on Ghanaian soil and the divorce is finalized. He wants to embarrass his family more than he wants to chase you across borders. He will stop." She looked at him. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said, "And you?" He said, "I will be fine." She said, "Jun Ho." He said very quietly, "Efua, I have been standing between you and the world for 5 years. Let me stand one more time." She looked at him for a long, long time. In her chest, something very old, something very tired, something that had been reaching for the sensible thing her whole life, began quietly to speak. "Go. He is offering. You can open the restaurant. You can go home. You can live." And then, underneath that voice, another voice, older and clearer, the voice her mother had used on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital in Accra 10 years ago, said quite simply, "Don't let anyone ever tell you take up too much room, my girl. The world was made big enough for you." Efua closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was not the woman who had walked into that office. She said, "No." He did not move. She said, "I spent 11 years being careful. I spent 11 years not reaching first. You have been carrying me in silence for 5 years. I am not going to let you carry this one alone. I am going to stand next to you, and we are going to win this together. Because I am not going to begin the rest of my life on the other side of a door you had to close alone." She reached across the small table. She took both of his hands in hers. She said, "Tell me what I need to do." He looked at her. He said quietly, almost with a smile, "Chef Sarpong, you are going to cook. Before I tell you what she did next, I want you to do something for me. In the comments, I want you to guess. Exactly how does a woman the world called an eyesore, a woman who was thrown out of a hospital bed 17 minutes after she gave up her kidney, a woman with a pair of scarred hands and a high afro puff and a mother who told her once that the world was big enough for her, bring down a man with her husband's name, her husband's money, and her husband's prosecutors in his pocket? I already know the answer. A handful of you are going to guess it. But you are going to have to earn it the way she did. Take your best shot in the comments. And then watch what this woman does with her hands." 3 days later, Efua Sarpong walked, alone, into the private wing of the Seoul Medical Center where her former mother-in-law was still recovering from the transplant. She was not stopped at the door. She was recognized on site, and 2 separate nurses stepped out of her way without being asked. And the security guard at the corner of the corridor looked at her for a long moment, recognized her, and turned his face toward the wall. Mi-sun was in the chair beside the bed. She was wearing a cream silk blouse. She was holding a cup of tea. When Efua walked into the room, the cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The old woman in the bed opened her eyes. She was pale. She was thin. She was propped up on 2 pillows, with a tube in her arm and a blanket across her lap, and she was the woman whose body was alive because a Ghanaian chef had given her a kidney 6 weeks ago. She saw Efua. She did not speak for a long moment. Then, in a voice that had once been very sharp and was softer now, she said to Mi-sun, in Korean, "Leave us." Mi-sun said, "Mother, I do not think." The old woman said, "Leave us." Mi-sun left. She did not look at Efua on her way out. Her smile, for the first time in the story, did not even try to arrive. The door closed. Efua walked, slowly, to the chair beside the bed. She sat down. She did not reach for the old woman's hand. She placed her own hands carefully in her lap. She said, in quiet Korean, "Mrs. Lee." The old woman said, "Efua." They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Efua said quietly, "I have not come here to ask you for anything." The old woman said, "I know. What have you come for?" Efua said, "I have come to tell you what your son said to me in a hospital room 6 weeks ago, 17 minutes after he was told that you would live." The old woman did not move. Efua said, "He walked into the room. He placed a folder on the bed. He placed a pen on the folder. He looked at my body. And he said very quietly the way a man comments on the weather. He said, 'You're an eyesore. And then he told me to sign the papers and go home. The old woman closed her eyes. Efua did not stop. She said, I know where he learned that sentence. I am not angry at you. I have lost my own mother. I know what it is to carry the voice of a mother in your chest for the rest of your life. I am telling you because I believe you have the power to stop passing it down. What he does next, he will do with your name on his lips. I wanted you to have the chance to decide whether you want that to continue. The old woman was silent for a very, very long time. Then, without opening her eyes, she said, How long have you known about the sentence? Efua said, Since the day I met you. You called him an eyesore in front of me at dinner. He was wearing the wrong tie. You laughed. He laughed with you. I did not laugh. The old woman's mouth moved very slightly. She did not quite smile. She did not quite grimace. Something between the two. She said, Leave me a number where I can reach you. Efua stood. She placed a small folded card on the edge of the bed. She said, Mrs. Lee, I am sorry for what he has done to you, and for what was done to him. The old woman did not answer. Efua walked out. Mi-sun was in the corridor. She was standing very still by the window at the end of the hallway, with her cream silk blouse immaculate, and her pearl earrings immaculate, and her hands, for the first time in 6 months, not doing anything at all. They were simply hanging at her sides. Efua walked past her. Then, 3 steps past her, she stopped. She did not turn around. She heard Mi-sun's voice behind her. Not loud. Not performed. Small and tired and very, very real. Mi-sun said, He is going to do it to me too, isn't he? Efua stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then she turned her head, just enough to see Mi-sun out of the corner of her eye. She said quietly, Yes, he is. She said, You have more money than I ever had, and better lawyers than I ever had, and a father who will answer your phone calls at 2 in the morning. Use all of that while you still have it. Mi-sun said, very quietly, Thank you. Efua walked on. She did not look back. Across the city, Seo Jun-ho was making his own choice. The senior prosecutor was a man he had known for 15 years. They had sat on the same charity board. They had, once at a long dinner, spoken about their mothers. Jun-ho went alone. He did not bring Tae-hoon. He did not bring a lawyer. He did not wear a tie. He walked into the man's office at 4 in the afternoon, unarmed, and he sat down in the chair across the desk, and he said quietly, You can take me. You have the authority. I am not going to run. I am not going to ask you to lose your career for me. But before you make your decision, I want you to listen to me for 10 minutes. And then you can decide. The prosecutor did not speak. Jun-ho told him. All of it. The alley in Busan. The boy. The rule. The noodle stand. The Ghanaian woman. The husband. The hospital. The sentence. The kidney. The inheritance. The prosecutor did not take a single note. When Jun-ho had finished, he said, The woman your friend's son is asking you to help him destroy gave her body, 6 weeks ago, to save the life of his mother. And 17 minutes after she did that, he called her an eyesore, and he walked out. That is the man you are being asked to stand next to. I am telling you this because I have known you for 15 years, and I am not going to let you stand next to him without knowing what you are standing next to. The prosecutor did not speak.
Jun-ho stood.
He said, I will not ask you to help her. I will not ask you to drop the file. I will simply ask you to sit with what you have heard for one night, and then do whatever you believe is right. He walked out. In the car, for the first time in the video, the audience saw his hand tremble very slightly as he closed the door. He had put himself on the table for her. He had not told her. 3 days later, at 6 in the morning, an old woman in a hospital bed in the private wing of the Seoul Medical Center reached for the small folded card Efua had left on the edge of her blanket, and she picked up her phone, and she dialed one number. The woman who answered on the other end was a journalist. She was in her mid-60s. She had been writing long-form investigative pieces in Seoul for 40 years. She and the old woman in the bed had gone to the same girls' school in the 1960s. Her first question, as she always said, was the same. She said, What is the story, and who is it about? The old woman in the bed told her. All of it. Her son. The kidney. The hospital room. The sentence. The fiancé at the tailor's. The inheritance clause. The Ghanaian girl. And then she told her one more thing. A detail she had not told her son. A detail she had not told her doctors. a detail she had kept in the bottom drawer of her own chest for 6 months, because she had been afraid of what it would mean if it were true. She said quietly, "In the months before I got sick, my son was bringing me a supplement. He said it was for my heart. He told me his nutritionist had recommended it. I was taking it every morning. I stopped the day I went into the hospital because the nurses took over my medication. I have 3 of the capsules in the drawer of my bedside table in Songbukdong. They are still sealed. I want you to have them tested. I will give you the key to the house. Do not tell him I asked you. I need to know." The journalist did not speak for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "I will send someone today." She hung up. The old woman closed her eyes. She said under her breath to no one, "Efua, I am so sorry, my child." The forensic toxicologist Junho had quietly received the 3 sealed capsules at 2 in the afternoon. By 9 that night, he had isolated the active compound. At 11, he called Efua's lawyer. Efua's lawyer called Efua at 11:30. Efua sat down on Akojua's couch when she heard what was in the capsules, and she was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I have seen this compound before." The lawyer said, "Where?" She said, "In a course I took 8 years ago in Lyon." A food historian was lecturing on slow poisoning through cooking in the French royal courts of the 17th century. The compound in this capsule is a modernized version of a slow renal toxin that was used to produce the exact kind of kidney failure that could be passed off as natural disease over about 9 to 14 months. It is not on any standard medical panel. You have to know to look for it. The only reason I recognize it now is that I prepared a historical reconstruction of it on a plate in that class. I made it, with my own hands, as a culinary exercise. I have the notebook. The lawyer said very carefully, "Mrs. Sarpong, do you understand what you are telling me?" She said, "Yes." She said, "He was not simply marrying a donor. He was building one. He was poisoning her slowly to force the crisis, to force the match to unlock the inheritance. And I was the match he married." She sat very still on the couch. Then she said, very quietly, "Put the report on the prosecutor's desk. Tomorrow morning." The lawyer said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." The prosecutor received the forensic report at 8 in the morning. At 8:15, his secretary received a call from a journalist he had known for 30 years, asking for a comment on a story she was about to run by 6 in the evening. At 8:40, the prosecutor received a second file, delivered by courier, from the office of a senior family law attorney acting on behalf of the woman named in the journalist's piece. At 9, the prosecutor sat back in his chair for a very long time. He thought about a man who had sat across his desk 3 days earlier and said, quietly, "I am not going to ask you to help her. I will simply ask you to sit with what you have heard for one night." He thought about his own mother. At 10, he signed the warrant. At 10:40, 4 officers walked into a private tailor's shop on the top floor of a department store in Cheongdamding, where a 37-year-old man was standing beside his fiancée in an immaculately fitted dark navy suit, being adjusted for a photography session that afternoon. She was in a cream silk engagement dress. The tailor, a small elderly man from Daegu, was on one knee adjusting the hem. The officers were very calm. They were very polite. The lead officer said, in careful Korean, "Lee Min Suk SSI, we would like you to come with us to answer some questions." Min Suk said, "I think there has been a misunderstanding." The officer said, "Sir, please come with us." Min Suk looked at Mi-sun. For one full second, his face did not know what to do. Mi-sun did not reach for him. Mi-sun did not speak. Mi-sun simply looked at him, with her smile arriving nowhere at all. With her eyes not tight at the corners for the first time in 6 months. With her hand very slowly, reaching up to the pearl at her throat, and unclipping the necklace, and folding it very carefully into her palm and turning and walking to the changing room and not looking back. The officers led Min Suk out of the tailor's shop. The tailor, still on one knee, blinked after them. Then he slowly stood up, bowed to no one in particular, and went to put the kettle on. In the office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, Seo Junho stood at the window and watched, on a muted television across the room, the footage of a man in a half-tailored navy suit being walked out of a department store in Cheongdamding. He did not smile. He closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them and he picked up his phone and he sent one message. To one number. "It is done. Come home when you are ready." Across the city, in a kitchen above a herbal shop in Itaewon, Fua Sarpong looked at her phone, read the message and set the phone down on the counter very gently, beside the wooden spoon her aunt had just handed her. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply picked up the spoon, and she stirred the pot, and she whispered under her breath in Chui to her mother one sentence. She said, "Mame, he heard you. The world was made big enough for me after all." If this is the story that reminded you of a woman you know, a woman you love, a woman you are, a woman who has been told, in 1,000 small ways across her life, that she is too much, too dark, too loud, too big, too black, too foreign, too full, too anything, then do one thing for me. Subscribe to this channel. Because every single week, quietly, I am going to tell you stories for that woman. And I would like very much for you to be in the room. 6 months later, dawn was breaking over Seoul. On the rooftop of a 4-story building in Jongno, the warm golden light of sunrise was spreading slowly across the city skyline and across the shoulders of a tall, full-figured Ghanaian woman in a gold Kent-inspired fitted dress, with her natural hair out and full, with her scarred hands relaxed at her sides, and with a slow, unguarded smile on her wide, expressive mouth. Down on the ground floor of the building, the windows of a new restaurant were being lit for the first time. A sign was being lifted into place above the door. It read, in clean black lettering on warm creamstone, Sarama, and under it, smaller, in flowing Chui script, Child of the Stars. Her mother's name was carved, quietly, into the lintel of the doorway. The stonemason had done it for free. He had known Akojua for 30 years. On the rooftop, Seo Junho stood across from her. He was not in a suit. He was in dark trousers, a dark roll neck, and the plain steel band still on the smallest finger of his left hand. He said quietly, "I have one question I never got to ask you. At the noodle stand in London, 5 years ago, why did you give me half of your meal? You didn't know me." Fua looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. A slow, full, unguarded smile. She said, "My mother told me once that the world was made big enough for me. I figured it was probably big enough for you too." Junho closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. It was the first time in the entire story that the audience had seen this man almost undone. He said quietly, "I have loved you for 5 years. I would like very much to love you for the rest of my life. If you will let me stand in the room." She lifted his hand. She pressed it very gently, against the left side of her body, against the place where the kidney used to be, against the scar that was still there and would be there forever. She said, "Stand in the room, and eat what I cook. For the rest of our lives." He turned his hand under hers. His scarred jawline caught the dawn. He did not speak. He did not need to. That evening, the doors of Nsarama opened for the first service. The restaurant was full. Adwoa Frimpong was in the corner, in a wrap dress the color of burnt gold, laughing with Akojua Boteng, whose silver-threaded afro caught the light every time she tilted her head back. Park Tae-hoon was at a small table by the window, his battered dark notebook open in front of him, his laugh lines deepening quietly as he watched the room. Chef Beck, the quiet old Korean master who had taken a young Ghanaian apprentice 3 years ago for reasons he had never fully explained, was at the bar, being very carefully handed a glass of palm wine by Akojua, who was teaching him, in her Accra-accented Korean, exactly how it was supposed to be sipped. And at the counter of the open kitchen, a man in a dark overcoat, alone, unremarkable to anyone who did not know, sat down on the middle stool and waited for her to look up. She looked up. Her tongue was caught between her teeth in concentration. Her scarred hands were working. Her high afro puff was full and out. There was a small dusting of flour on her cheekbone. He said, quietly, exactly the way he had said it the very first night he walked into the small Jongno restaurant a year ago. "What are you cooking tonight?" She looked at him. She smiled. She said, "Something you'll remember. One final thing. A week before the opening of Nsarama, an old woman in a private wing of the Seoul Medical Center requested a supervised prison visit with her son. It was granted. She was wheeled into a glass-partitioned room. He sat down on the other side of the glass. He was in a beige prison uniform. His hair had not been cut in 3 months. His hands were in his lap. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly through the glass, in a voice that had once been very sharp and was softer now. She said, "Min Suk, I called you an eyesore every day of your childhood. I was wrong. You were beautiful. And I broke you. Fua never broke. That is the difference between her and us. Not her body, not her skin, her spine. I wish I had known how to give you one. He did not answer. He did not look up. She sat with him in silence for the remaining 28 minutes of the visit. When the guard came to take her back, she placed one hand, very briefly, against the glass. He did not lift his. She was wheeled out, and in the silence of that visiting room, a cycle that had started 4 generations back in the Lee family, a sentence that had been passed down from a mother to a son to a wife to a stranger in a hospital bed, finally, quietly ended. Because a Ghanaian chef in a small kitchen in Mapo, 6 months earlier, had listened to a man say 3 words, had chosen not to sign, and had refused to inherit them. She was never an eyesore. She was the only thing in the room worth looking at. He had always known. And now, finally, so did she. If the story moved you, sit with me for a moment in the comments. I do not want a reaction. I want a memory. Tell me about the moment in your own life when someone quietly fed you when you did not know you were hungry. Tell me about the moment someone stood in the room with you without being asked. Tell me the person who comes up, behind your eyes, when I say the word home. That is what love is. Not the speech. Not the ring. Not the gesture in the rain. The chair moved slightly so your left side is to the wall. The song remembered 6 weeks later. The half a meal slid across a counter to a stranger who turned out, 5 years later, to be the only person in the world worth waiting for. Until next time, take care of yourself. And if there is somebody in your life right now who feeds you quietly without asking anything in return, would you please, sometime this week, let them know that you noticed. Because somebody noticed Efua. And it changed everything.